If you reached into a bowl of pistachios 50 years ago, you would have pulled out something bright red, not green, red. And 20 minutes later, your fingers and your lips were stained the same guilty color. For almost 100 years, that was simply what a pistachio looked like to most Americans. But the red had nothing to do with the nut itself, and nothing to do with flavor. It was hiding something. This is the strange reason pistachios used to be red, and the even stranger reason they turned green again. To understand why anyone would paint a nut red, you first have to understand the nut. And the pistachio is far older than you would ever guess. Shrink yourself down on the timeline of human history for a moment. Picture every snack you have ever eaten lined up behind you, stretching back into the past. Most of them are recent. Potato chips are a little over a century old. Chocolate, as we know it, a few hundred years. But the pistachio just keeps going, past the pyramids, past the first cities, all the way back to a cave in the mountains of Western Asia. Archaeologists found charred pistachio shells in ancient fire pits there, dated to roughly 6,700 years before the Common Era. Some researchers believe Neanderthals were cracking wild pistachios open as far back as 300,000 years ago, long before our own species arrived. So that red-stained snack in a 1970s vending machine was already one of the oldest foods on the planet. And the tree it came from is hiding a secret of its own. Here's something that catches a lot of people off guard. A pistachio is not really a nut. At least not the way an almond or a walnut is. It is a seed, tucked inside a fruit. The pistachio tree grows clusters of small fruits that look a little like tiny rose-colored grapes. And inside each one sits the green seed we love. That green color is chlorophyll, the very same pigment that makes leaves green, which is why a good pistachio is one of the only foods on Earth that is naturally that shade. Hold on to that green, because it matters later. But the real magic is in how the seed opens. Pistachio trees come in two kinds, male and female, and only the females grow the seeds we eat. As the seed swells inside the shell, it pushes outward with surprising force, until the shell can no longer hold it and snaps apart along a natural seam. In the orchards of Iran, farmers say that on a still day you can actually hear it happening. A faint chorus of tiny pops drifting across the trees. To the people who first found them, that smiling shell looked like an invitation. And the empires that came next treated it like treasure. By the time the great empires of the ancient world rose across what is now Iran, the pistachio had stopped being just food. It had become a symbol of wealth. In the courts of the Persian kings, pistachios were a luxury reserved for royalty, written about in some of our oldest surviving texts as a prize worth guarding. Legend says the Queen of Sheba loved them so much that she claimed her kingdom's entire harvest for herself and her court, forbidding ordinary people from growing them. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the wonders of the ancient world, were said to hold rows of pistachio trees among their terraces more than 2,700 years ago. For century after century, this little green seed stayed locked inside one corner of the world. But trade was about to set it loose. The thing that carried the pistachio out of Persia was the same thing that carried silk, spices, and ideas. The long, dusty trade routes we now call the Silk Road. Pistachios were close to the perfect travel food. They were light, they were full of energy, and they could survive months in a saddlebag without spoiling, which made them precious to merchants crossing deserts and mountains. Around the year 35 in the Common Era, a Roman official is said to have brought the first pistachio trees into Italy after a campaign in the east, and from there, the tree spread across the Mediterranean into Sicily, Greece, and Spain. Traveling the other direction, the pistachio reached China, where people noticed the very same thing the ancient farmers had. The split shell looked like a grin. They started calling it the happy nut, and to this day, pistachios are handed out as gifts during the Lunar New Year, as a wish for good fortune. For thousands of years, that was the whole story. Then the pistachio crossed an ocean, and the strangest chapter of all began. When pistachios first arrived in the United States in the late 1800s, carried over by immigrants from the Middle East, Americans did not quite know what to make of them. They showed up in coin-operated vending machines in train stations and bars, sold by the handful. And that is where the red comes in. Back then, pistachios were harvested and processed slowly, and the leftover moisture from the fruit left ugly blotches and stains across the natural shell. Importers were convinced that no customer would ever reach for a spotty, blemished nut, so they came up with a simple trick. They dyed the entire shell a bright uniform red, covering every imperfection underneath. And the loud color had a bonus. Inside a crowded vending machine, a red nut practically grabbed you by the eyes. So the red was never about the pistachio. It was makeup, painted on to hide a flaw the seller did not want you to see. For almost 100 years, that disguise held. But the red was already living on borrowed time, and what finally stripped it away was not a change in taste. It was a single man, a single seed, and an international crisis. If you're enjoying this slow unraveling of how a snack got its color, do me a quick favor and tap subscribe. The next part is where the whole story turns. Now let me introduce you to the man who accidentally built an empire. In 1929, the United States Department of Agriculture sent a botanist named William Whitehouse on an unusual mission. His job was to travel to Iran and bring back pistachio seeds that might one day grow on American soil. For 6 months, Whitehouse wandered through Persian orchards, gathering samples by hand, and he came home with about 20 pounds of seeds. Those seeds were planted at a research station in Chico, California, and then came the slow part. The team grew roughly 3,000 trees and waited years to see what they would become. Out of all of them, one single female tree stood above the rest. Its seeds were larger, its yields were stronger, and it handled the California climate beautifully. They named that variety Kerman, after a famous carpet-making city in Iran. But here is the part that sounds almost impossible. Nearly every pistachio grown in America today traces back to that one tree. Billions of nuts, an entire industry worth billions of dollars. All of it descended from a single seed that one man pulled out of a pile halfway around the world. By the late 1970s, California was harvesting its first real commercial crops. And then history handed this young industry a gift it never asked for. For most of the 20th century, Iran was the undisputed king of pistachios, supplying much of the world, including the red ones sitting in American vending machines. California was the tiny newcomer. Then, in 1979, everything changed. The Iranian Revolution swept the country, and that November, a group of students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. They would be held for 444 days. Relations between the two nations collapsed, and in 1980, the United States cut off Iranian imports. Almost overnight, Iranian pistachios vanished from American shelves. That embargo opened the door. But here is the part the popular story usually leaves out. The thing that kept the door propped open was not just the crisis. It was a tariff. In 1986, after American growers complained that Iran was flooding the market with cheap nuts, the United States placed a staggering 241% tariff on Iranian and shell pistachios. That tariff is still in force today, renewed as recently as 2025. For nearly 40 years, it has quietly done the heavy lifting that the hostage crisis gets all the credit for. And with Iranian red nuts effectively locked out, California rushed in to fill the gap with its own. Because those modern American plants dried the nuts fast enough that they never stained, there was nothing left to cover up. So nobody dyed them. The red simply disappeared, and the pistachio turned green again, the same green it had always been on the tree. So who owns the pistachio now? For thousands of years, that crown sat with Iran. Today, it has crossed the ocean. The United States grows more than half of all the pistachios on the planet, somewhere around 60% in recent seasons, while Iran sits at a distant second, squeezed by drought, water shortages, and the same sanctions that started this whole chapter. And nearly 99% of the American crop comes from that single state, California. Every harvest, there is still a race against the clock. From late summer into fall, machines roll through the orchards, wrap their arms around each trunk, and shake the trees until the fruit rains down onto tarps so the seeds never touch the ground. From that moment, growers have only about 12 to 24 hours to hull and dry every nut. Because if that wet fruit clings any longer, it stains. The exact problem the red dye once existed to hide is still out there, lurking in every harvest. They have just learned to beat it with speed instead of paint. So the next time you see a bowl of green pistachios, remember that the color is the punchline of a very long joke. A seed older than the wheel, hoarded by kings, carried across deserts, smuggled across an ocean, painted red to fool you, and finally turned green again by a revolution and a tax. If this rewired the way you see the things on your kitchen counter, stick around. There is a whole world of ordinary food hiding stories this strange, and we will crack open the next one together.